Hey, we have a fun, spooky Halloween episode here today, and I have three very special guests. Very excited to have George Feltenstein on from the Warner Archive, Dr. Steve Haberman and Constantine Nasr, who are both writers, producers, and film historians. So I hope you'll enjoy our special Halloween episode on The Extras. So, George, you have a great month. You have three classic horror releases coming from the Warner Archive this month. That feels like more than it's been for a while. So how'd that all come together?
Fan demand. Everybody was asking for these films, and I made sure well in advance that we'd be able to bring in the camera negatives from the Library of Congress and do a full restoration with 4K scans. And they look phenomenal. And thank you to these gentlemen who have been so integral in helping to support not only these releases, but of course, releases in past years. You guys are my heroes, and I'm eternally grateful to you.
Back at you, George.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and just for those who don't know, this is our third Halloween podcast talking about your commentaries that you guys have done on certain different releases, which is a lot of fun. Steve, we were just talking earlier. This is becoming a yearly habit, and I said, "Yeah, let's do it each year. That's terrific fun. Why not?" So, well, let's talk about. We'll talk about all three films that are releasing from the Warner Archive this month. But let's start with The Beast with Five Fingers from 1946, because I know, Constantine, you and Steve created and recorded an all-new commentary for it. And Steve, maybe we'll start with you. Maybe you can provide a little background on the origins of the film. I know there's a lot of interesting stuff leading up to it.
Well, it's based on a short story by W.H. Harvey, which is very, very well regarded, anthologized from the early 20th century. And Warner Brothers was not too prolific with horror films ever. Even in the 30s, really, they only made, 4 or 5 in the 30s. And they only made, if you don't count Arsenic and Old Lace as a horror film, they only made one in the 40s, and it was The Beast with Five Fingers, because Jack Warner wasn't particularly, excited about that genre. But, it almost would have been commercial malpractice had they not at least tried to make a horror film during the horror boom between 1931 and 1946 or so. So the one they made late in the game was The Beast with Five Fingers, as I said, based on this short story by Harvey. And he wisely had Kurt Siodmak do the screenplay, and Kurt Siodmak had written some stuff for Universal, like The Wolfman and Black Friday, and he also wrote the first draft of I Walk with a Zombie, which was basically completely rewritten by Ardell Ray. But he was very into, kind of like Roger Corman later in the 1960s, he was into the psychology of the protagonists of horror. I mean, especially obviously in The Wolfman. As a matter of fact, his original script of The Wolfman didn't show the Wolfman. It was all about the suffering of Lawrence Talbot. So he was probably the guy to pick to do the screenplay for Beast with Five Fingers, and he worked on it for a good long time. We have notes from him as far back as 1942. Working on it, and he made it a movie about castration anxiety, and I go into that in great detail in the commentary. I may say the word penis one or too many times, but I don't want to give it away. But it's kind of obvious. It's about a guy who cuts the hand off of somebody else that is his father figure. So you do the math. It's very Freudian, and he really. What he did was he made an hour and 26-minute brilliant gothic horror film, dark, brilliant, psychological mystery horror film. And Warner Brothers tacked on a 1-minute cringy comedy epilogue at the very end. But it doesn't ruin the movie. However, it's quite confusing when you go through the hour and 26 minutes of gothic horror, and at the end it becomes this farce for 1 minute. But anyway, that's what we did. That's how we approached The Beast with Five Fingers.
Constantine, maybe you can pick up on that.
Well, I think that there was some opportunity to go back and read a little bit of what was written prior to I think like the declining years of the horror film, which we're talking about the movie that kind of ended it right before Abbott and Costello met Frankenstein and really ended it, but. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of access to what I liked. Steve and I both like to go back to the original script and script notes. This was a hard one to. We didn't have the time and also like the ability to find the access at the USC archives. So I think just going back and trying to have a better understanding of Florey's intent. Florey as a filmmaker, to me, watching some of his earlier work and then also kind of digging back into the career of Peter Lorre at that time and Warner Brothers, who was also, kind of like waning in the, I guess, Jack Warner wasn't exactly appreciative of Peter Lorre in the mid 40s. And a lot of that had to do with his political feelings, right? So kind of for me, going back and understanding the people who made the film, and then also realizing that Kurt Siodmak, as Steve was saying, was such a critical figure for, he pretty much, from a writer's perspective, ruled the 1940s. When you look at all the films he had a hand in, for things might have been adjusted along the way, but particularly when you look at his involvement with Universal and then with Val Lewton in a movie like this, Siodmak was all over the place in a way as an independent writer that I think was like really impressive, and a lot of it had to do with a very psychological impact, and it was no coincidence that, of course, at this time, film noir was so strong that those German expressionist ideas of the mind also inform the way the thematics of the films of the 1940s went, concurrently with the horror film, including a movie that we all love, like Son of Dracula, which was a Siodmak experience. So I think that, to me, was the most interesting part, and really looking back on a movie that I hadn't kind of watched in quite a while, hoping that George was going to get to it, and he got to it like with two other great films.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, George, why don't we?
Thank you, George.
George, why don't we throw that to you then, and you can talk a little bit about the film and what's made it so popular over the years, and kind of how the restoration process came together.
Well, this is particularly gratifying because I would say maybe 10 years ago, maybe more, we did remaster the film for DVD. And that wasn't a restoration, that was a new master, because what had been existing before was like 30 years old at that time and looked really awful. But we didn't have access to the original negative. A new fine grain was made, and that master did not look very good, and I was disappointed in the quality, because it was so beautifully shot, you want to have the presentation be up to the par of what the creators intended. So to be able to get the approval to go for it and do something that was really definitive, scanning the neg at 4K, coming out with this new Blu-ray that is really pristine. This is incredibly rewarding, because the fan base for certain films, and this is one of them, they were very vocal. We want this on Blu, and I hear that about 4,000 or 5,000 films all the time, but because everybody has their favorite. But this is definitely a keeper. It's really important in the studio's history, and it maintains its ability to entertain and fascinate, especially because, as you guys just pointed out, this was not a genre that Warner Brothers really looked into very much. There were some B pictures in the early 40s, like The Hidden Hand and The Mysterious Doctor and so forth, that were like they weren't really horror films, but they were exploring mystery. This was more blatant horror and is to be treasured for that reason.
Yeah, I recall in listening to your audio commentary, guys, and looking at the images, you talked a lot about the influence of German Expressionism and the way it's filmed. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because in this restoration, I think that really helps, George, with this kind of filmmaking to really see the blacks and the contrast and everything.
Precisely.
Robert Florey wanted it to be more expressionistic. His idea this is not really a movie he wanted to do, but once they made him do it, he really got into it. And he said, I got excited about it. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to make it from the Peter Lorre character's point of view, and he's mad. So he was really trying to do a Dr. Caligari type thing where we would find out this was all the vision of a madman at the end. And he was going to go for not just expressionistic lighting and camera angles, but expressionistic sets. But the producer said that would be commercial suicide. We're not doing that. So they didn't. But I think the movie is stronger for that because, it's naturalistic, but it's Gothic. As you said, the lighting is very high contrast, use of shadows, use of moving camera and radical angles and so forth. So, and it gets more so as the narrative progresses, and the narrative forces you into the Peter Lorre character's head in the last act. And then Robert Florey has more fun with extreme angles and with the strange lighting and music. Max Steiner's score is fabulous in this, and with expressionistic sound effects. He does wonders with like a mandolin string breaking and the sound of wind coming down a chimney and things like that. Wonderful stuff when it gets very expressionistic, but yet it's still in a naturalistic environment. It's just what the camera and the sound effects and the performance. Peter Lorre goes full out expressionistic.
Yeah,
as a German actor,
right.
From that, he knew what he was doing. So he does a lot of, stuff. And so it has that quality to it, but within a naturalistic framework. And I think it works extremely well.
Yeah, I mean, they do a lot of close-ups on him when he's in those modes. But let's talk about Peter Lorre for a second. Constantine, what did you learn about Peter Lorre in some of this research, or what are just some of your thoughts on his performance in this film?
Well, I think that it starts off in a way where Peter Lorre he's not a background character, but he's not presented as the main character, and I like how the film progresses. That he, as Steve said, he kind of just starts unraveling, and he goes full on Gothic, German expressionism by the end. So I think he hadn't really had that opportunity for the genre. Not that he was looking to do a horror film, certainly at that time. I just found it to be one of his more compelling films of the period, because he was often used, always really good. That's the thing. You watch a Peter Lorre film from really any of his films. He's a good, very good, strong supporting player, but he expected to have better roles, and Warner Brothers just didn't give him anything that was like the one of the last great leading roles he had was with Robert Florey with The Face Behind the Mask in 1930. Steve, was it 1940?
1940, yeah, Columbia. 1940.
Yeah, no, it was Columbia. Yeah, but 1940. So he's got 5 years where he's in The Maltese Falcon, memorable, and he's memorable in Casablanca and the Curtiz films. I was just watching Arsenic and Old Lace, another great Warner Brothers Halloween film that Criterion put out. What?
I said not quite a horror film, almost a horror.
Almost, but it's a Halloween film. We're at Halloween, and I got to thank George for helping make that happen.
Beautiful, beautiful.
But you're like, well, where's Peter Lorre like cutting loose? And this was the movie where he gets to cut loose, and it's not as dimensional as The Face Behind the Mask. That really is a wonderful, sad movie. Less a horror film than just it's a tragic film. And obviously he had a great experience working with Robert Florey So the two of them may not have wanted to do this movie, but I think they made a very, very, very memorable movie and a sort of a final statement of the period in the mid 1940s before the genre just again just gets shunted away.
Yeah, some of the things that I learned that I wanted to just mention, and we're not going to talk about the commentary because people need to watch the movie, see it in its brilliance first. I mean, this new Blu-ray. To your point, George, when these films go from DVD to Blu-ray, the reason everybody's asking for those is because that's the huge jump, right? It's that DVD
It really is.
to Blu-ray. That's the huge jump in terms of quality. And Steve, you mentioned the Max Steiner score. So then the audio as well, to get that, the full composition of the orchestration in this one specifically behind this great visual really makes the viewing experience a totally new experience, really, for people. So they need to see that first. And then when they can come and view it again with your audio commentary, so much you guys put in there, nuggets of information and everything. But here we are talking about Peter Lorre, and of course, he's not even the lead in the film, but he's so memorable in this. The other cast members, Robert Alda, Andrea King, you guys talk about a lot. Talk about some of the other performances. And of course, I want to talk about the hand itself a little bit.
Well, the hand is the star, of course,
Yeah.
and the special effects are fantastic. I mean, everybody talks about that Peter Lorre movie with the hand,
Right.
and there's two movies that could be. That could be Peter Lorre's first American movie, which is Mad Love, where that's a remake of The Hands of Orlok, which was a novel and then a silent movie in Germany with Conrad Veidt. And Peter Lorre did it in America in 1935. Karl Freund directed it, and he plays a mad doctor who has to remove the damaged hands of a concert pianist and put graft on the hands of a knife murderer to save the man's hands, as one does. And of course, the hands of the knife murderer have a will of their own. At least Peter Lorre wants to talk Colin Clive, the poor pianist, into thinking so. So that was the first hand movie of Peter Lorre. But this is really the hand movie.
Yeah.
First of all, this is the first disembodied hand feature. It became kind of a horror movie trope later on. The Amicus films from England in the 60s liked to have hand short stories, but this is the hand movie, the classic first hand movie, and Peter Lorre just the fact that he's not in the first two acts as much as he's in the third act doesn't matter, because what people take home from this movie is the actual basis of the movie, which is a crawling hand short story. A guy's being haunted. That had kind of the short story itself is not as much of a horror story as Kurt Siodmak made the movie. It's got horrible things in it. It's a creepy, eerie sort of idea, but it has a kind of British understatement in the character's reactions to the crawling hand that keeps it from being full. But this movie, Peter Lorre, if there were no hand in this movie, his reactions would make it a horror movie, because he's so bipolar in it. You know how Peter Lorre likes to get very excited, and then he's a lot in this movie,
Right.
And that's what people remember. So, but the hand, though, they did the hand a number of different ways. They had a couple of mechanical hands. They had a non-moving wax hand, and they also did the hand with a real concert pianist who was doing a Bach piece for one hand that had actually been rejiggered for one hand on piano. And what they did is they did it like they did Claude Rains in The Invisible Man. The pianist was wrapped all in black velvet, right. And just the hand and the piano were shot against black, and then that was matted into the set, in which then they covered up the hand and the piano, so that was made into a shadow. The optical printer does this. It's many different steps, and it all has to be compounded with an optical printer. But they did it exactly the way they did Claude Rains in The Invisible Man with black velvet doing the invisible parts, and it works beautifully. I mean, the special effects in this movie are, without CGI, they're by far the best crawling hand special effects you'll ever see in a movie.
Yeah. Well, it fascinated me hearing you guys talking about that, the effects that you just went through over there with the hand. But I think the one thing that just kind of, the question that sticks with me is why did Jack Warner, when he didn't care for horror, I mean, why did the studio buy the short story rights, and why did they develop I mean, like they did, and you mentioned that it's like the last of that horror period, classical horror period, but why? I mean, why did he do it? Well, like, why do one right here at the end?
He wanted a piece of the pie. People were making a lot of money on horror films.
Sure took him a while.
Yeah, it took him a while. But you know what? The next horror film he made was House of Wax in 1953. And that was a huge hit again. I think he finally learned his lesson, because then he made The Bad Seed, and then he picked up the distribution rights for Curse of Frankenstein. And every time he decided to make a horror movie or distribute a horror movie, it was a hit. So I don't know. I don't know why he didn't like the genre. Maybe it tapped into something that he didn't want to face.
But more than just he didn't like it, why all of a sudden, it's just financial, you're saying, is the reason why they did The Beast?
I think so. Because you know what? Every time Jack Warner, especially in the early days with Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum and Return of Dr. X and The Beast with Five Fingers and even House of Wax, even when he makes a real gothic, masterpiece, in the end, he will have a comic scene, as if to tell the audience, we were just kidding. Go home, forget about it, don't worry about it. It's particularly egregious in this picture, in The Beast with Five Fingers, because it's such a dark, sort of disturbing movie on a subconscious level. I told you it's about castration anxiety, which, of course, everybody can enjoy. But at the end of it, he tries to soften the blow, if you'll pardon the expression, with this comedy scene, saying, "Oh, we were just kidding. It's all. Don't worry about it."
Well, I mean, when I think of the history of Warner Brothers, I think of a lot of great horror films over the last 100 years. And of course, in the 30s, we're going to be talking about a couple of them in a few minutes. But I just found that interesting because this one is it's so good. So, well,
I think they really saw this as an opportunity to make something that would be a commercial hit, and that's what Jack Warner was always looking for, was success at the box office.
And was it a hit, George?
I think it made back its money.
No, it did better than that. It did okay. It did pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a blockbuster, but it was a profitable picture.
Right.
And that's the most important thing.
And it was an expensive picture. I mean, that was an expensive little movie. It had a 52-day schedule, and it cost about $500,000. That was a lot of money in 1946.
And they had confidence in it.
Yeah. Well, it was, that was a tried and true genre in the 40s. It was a little bit more, it went two ways. There were the very dark psychological adult RKO Val Lewton films,
right,
which by and large mostly were hits. And then there were the sort of more juvenile monster movies from Universal. I mean, of course, that genre started as an adult genre in the 30s, but by the time they were making them during the war in the 1940s, they had, they'd sort of gone down the IQ scale a little bit in pictures like House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula and pictures like that, where they became kind of monster mashes and, monsters are fighting and so on and so forth. So there were different kinds of horror films. And then there were, in the 40s, movies like Gaslight were considered horror. And certainly movies like The Lodger and Hangover Square and Dragonwyck at Fox, those movies were considered horror movies. And they were very psychological. They were very expensive. They were very gothic. And so, that genre had a big spread in the 40s.
What I wanted to say. You asked me before, what did I learn, or what did I come to appreciate? I had spent a lot of time many years ago studying Robert Florey, and what I liked was trying to figure him out during this period, because he was bouncing around between Columbia and independent studios, as well as doing a series of Warner Brother films like God Is My Co-Pilot and The Desert Song, a couple memorable films for the 40s, and discovering that he was a guy who really tried to buck the system whenever he could. If he didn't like something, he'd just be like, all right, I'm not going to take that job. And he's going to go gallivanting across Europe and come back, and the job might still be there because somebody else might have turned it down. He was not somebody that just took the job that Jack Warner would give him. But in this particular case, I think even after he turned it down, it was still there. And he found a way to tune into it. And it was definitely the right film for him and for Peter Lorre. But it was interesting that, he's a guy that often is forgotten. He's remembered for being the guy who almost made Frankenstein, but he made a number of really strong films. And he made a number of films, as we mentioned, The Face Behind the Mask being a film that was, I don't know the budget of that film, but it certainly was a fraction of what he had when he was working for Warner Brothers and doing a movie like this. So I think if you look back at this film, it's worth taking a look at some of the other films that Florey had done, and giving a director and a writer, a very the multi-hyphenate filmmaker that Florey was, another chance, especially when you see what he was able to do with what was, a decent budget, but arguably not anything special with, for Warner Brothers at that time.
Well, there are a couple other extras you put on here, George. I'll just mention you got the classic cartoons, the Foxy Duckling and the Gay Antes, and the theatrical trailer. So altogether, this is a great release. It's got the new commentary with you guys there, which is just load. You guys just load your commentaries with information. It's fascinating. I love it. So this is a great package.
Thank you. What's also great is these three that George released are all Warner Brothers films. It's not an RKO film. It's not an MGM film. Like George, laid it here's Warner Horror 1940s. Enjoy.
Right.
That was exactly the objective.
Right.
And I've never seen Beast with Five Fingers look this good. Right off the camera negative. Oh my God, it is beautiful. It looks like it was shot yesterday. The fans are going to go nuts for this.
So that was our discussion for The Beast with Five Fingers. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to hear some more, we have another discussion with the same group here of guests, where we talk about The Walking Dead from 1939, and then we have The Return of Dr. X from 1936. So look for those here on our YouTube channel. And if you're enjoying our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That helps us out and lets us know that you're interested. Thanks for listening.